Hey everybody and welcome back. Today we're going to continue working through the NPCs of Stardew Valley. Last time we talked about Linus, the wild man who lives in the mountains, peacefully adapted to nature. This time we're going to talk about the other wild individual in Stardew Valley. To be honest, I kind of didn't want to make this video because this one is going to be rough. There's a lot to unpack with the wild child lost at sea trope, and a lot of it is super uncomfortable. We haven't had a good sort by controversial video in a couple of months now, and this one is probably going to take the crown there. I want to preface this entire video by saying I think ConcernedApe did an amazing job with Stardew Valley. Every character is fleshed out, with deep personal motivations for their actions and an important place in the valley. Even side characters like Dwarf and Marlin have their place in the cast of Stardew Valley. But with that said, I think Leo was a mistake. Let's start with the basics before we get too divisive here. Leo is the most important NPC added to the game with the 1.5 update. When you make your way to Ginger Island after completing the Community Center or the Joja Development Form, and then fixing Willie's boat, you'll stumble upon this young boy dressed in unique, colorful clothing. Leo is reluctant to speak with the farmer at first, and players have to kind of befriend the island's parrots before Leo will warm up to the farmer. As you continue to gain hearts with Leo, he'll become more and more friendly, eventually even moving to Pelican Town after you achieve 6 hearts. And speaking of hearts, Leo has a pretty beefy 4 heart scenes plus 2 recipes he sends in the mail. That's practically on par with marriage candidates, which really lets you know that Leo was intended to be an important focal point for your visit to Ginger Island. The most important scene for most players will be at 6 hearts, when Leo ends up packing up and moving to the valley, though he spends some time in both worlds. The parrots build a treehouse for him out of the tree just north of Robin's home, and he lives peacefully under the care of Linus. Penny takes him into her makeshift school time at the library, and he's shown adjusting well to civilized life in the valley. And that's great, right? Well, here's my issue with Leo, and to be fair, this is going to be a bit of a tangent while I speak about Ginger Island as a whole, and we will get back to Leo, but I want to lay some groundwork first. Ginger Island is supposed to be this untamed wilderness that acts as a late-game farm and dungeon where you can expand your operations even further. There are huge swaths of land to cultivate, and the island holds a few items specific to the 1.5 update. For example, you're not getting pineapples on the mainland or finding stingrays in the water around the valley. And what's really convenient is that you don't even have to displace any local populations, because there's no one living here. So as a player, we don't have to wrestle with the concept of silly things like, colonialism. This is just another step on the way to perfection for us, not a land grab after all. But there are a couple things going on at Ginger Island that make me a little uncomfortable, if we dig a little deeper. Let's start with the individuals who live on the island when we arrive. We have Leo, Birdie, and Professor Snail, of course. There's also a civilization of parrots. There's turtles who act as roadblocks, a dwarf who acts as a merchant, and an anthropomorphic parrot who does the same, some pirates who show up every other sunny day, and a mermaid or two. Mr. Key maintains an office, kind of, here on the island for some reason. I guess there's also the gourmand frog and the, whack-a-mole thing. So the island is pretty populous, despite the fact that there aren't a ton of structures here. We have some docks, Birdie's hut, the forge, Leo's treehouse, and the ruins of a few structures. So we know that at one point there were people living here. Who were they? Where did they go? Importantly, what did they look like? Here's the problem I see, and I say this again with the utmost respect for ConcernedApe because I think the man is a genius. But we had the opportunity to include some diversity here, and instead we added anthropomorphic animals, a space race dwarf thing, and some transient inhabitants, so that when our millionaire farmer stumbles upon this land, we don't have to feel guilty about immediately taking control of it. I mean, it's a game after all, right? We should be having fun, expanding our fields, and this new and exciting place is a natural endgame home for us. But the difference between Ginger Island and our home farm is that Grandpa gave us the deed to that land. On Ginger Island, we're just planting a flag as the first person who has come here. Or at least the first person since the original farmhouse on the island fell into disrepair. From a gameplay standpoint, that's a natural next step in progression. From a real-life perspective, it's a little uncomfortable, right? And that's why I think there are no inhabitants on the island when we get there. A permanent population might make us think, like, this isn't really right. This doesn't belong to me. And I've kind of fallen into this trap in my own writing as well, so I totally get it. It's easier to just pretend this island was never inhabited and that it's a brand new land full of exciting opportunities. But it really wasn't. So I guess that's my problem with Ginger Island as an endgame destination. We could have seen ConcernedApe's take on a culture wildly different from the Valley. But instead we have this place that's like a theme park for us, where we don't have to interact with the native population because it's easier to use talking magic birds and dwarves than it is to face some really nasty tropes in media. And while I'm mentioning media, let me talk pop culture for just a second, because this is a long-standing issue, and it will relate back to Leo in a minute here. Movies and books like Tarzan and The Jungle Book often touch on this same kind of subject. An exotic land with wild, dangerous animals, and a child who's been lost, abandoned, whatever. And the anthropomorphic animals, of course, raise this child. The kid ends up rising to the top of the social structure because, of course, a human, frequently a white one, is more innately talented than the bears, tigers, and apes, which, goodness, that's a whole different problem. It's a popular concept, but increasingly we're realizing that we're saying things about ourselves in these movies and really passing down some expectations to the viewers. I don't want to get too deep into the cultural issues with these archetypes because there's really too much to cover, and I'm not really the person to do it, you know? But it's worth noting that a recurring theme is like the white man's burden and or the mission of civilization. The White Man's Burden is a poem by Rudyard Kipling, the author of The Jungle Book, by the way, which was written to encourage the United States to control and colonize the Philippine Islands. Kipling believed that it was the duty of the civilized man to raise people of color to civilization as he understood it. It meant teaching language, cultural norms, yada 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 to those half-devil, half-child inhabitants, through force or power if necessary. The civilized man should do what was best for the savage because he knew what was best and they did not. And that's where Leo comes in. The first few times we speak to Leo, he speaks in halting sentences. He remembers speaking, but it's hard for him. He says things like, "When Sun is angry, it feels good in the jungle. Sun can't find us beneath the leaves. We trick him. Aha." As you get closer to Leo and ultimately bring him back to the valley, he becomes more and more eloquent. Eventually, Leo will conquer more difficult concepts like when he asks if jazz might ever come to like him. We are gradually civilizing Leo, which is something I think a lot of players enjoy actually, bringing this wild child back to the mainland and helping him fit into society. He's their little bird boy, and they truly want what's best for him. And the villagers notice too. Leo even tells you that Mayor Lewis thinks he's becoming a well-rounded citizen as he begins to fit the mold of the valley's expectations. Leo doesn't resist these changes. In fact, he's the one that makes the decision himself after Willie and Linus bring up the option. Leo doesn't have to reject his family to return to civilization, like Mowgli does at the end of the Jungle Book, which I would say is a fantastic compromise that allows him to hold on to his culture. But he's a kid in two worlds, and while his parrot family apparently supports him and wants him to experience a new chapter, the civilized people in the valley want to fix this wild child. We already learned from Linus that the never-ending pursuit of material wealth and that social structure that comes along with it is not necessary for inner peace. But Leo's entire story kind of rotates around how you need to at least play along with civilized society to have a happy life. After all, Leo seems much happier once he's around other kids, right? Maybe Linus can teach him to bridge that gap, to live in both worlds. Or maybe he'll end up returning to nature as an adult. It's kind of tough to say. Either way though, Leo's narrative reinforces the idea that to fix a person, you impose your own cultural expectations on them. And to me, that just feels a little icky.